Rain in Arizona was rare enough, but when it came, it brought with it a host of challenges that could break even the toughest cowboys. We'd been holed up at the Double R for nigh on 3 days. Our plans had been washed away by the downpour, leaving us restless and eager for action. Most folks would think a little rain in the desert would be a blessing, but for us it was a curse that threatened to derail our entire cattle drive. Through the windows of the bunkhouse I could see the corral was a sea of mud, with our horses standing dejected, tails tucked against the ceaseless downpour. Our herd of 2,000 longhorns was scattered across the high country, unreachable in this weather. The flats would be too boggy for riding, and any attempt to move the chuck wagon would surely end with it mired axle-deep in mud. It was then that old Uncle Jim mentioned the Arizona Jackson country. It's the wildest part of Arizona you ever did see, vast and rugged. Not a soul living there, but plenty of game. Instead of sitting around waiting for the land to dry, we decided to head out and have ourselves a real hunt. And we thought we might even be able to find a new trail for the herd while we were at it. We set about gathering what gear we could find. An old army pack saddle with aparejos was unearthed from the tack room, along with a sawbuck saddle with kayaks. We packed enough provender to last a week or more, though in truth, none of us knew how long we might be gone. Our bedding we bound flat about the horses' naked barrels by means of the squaw hitch, a sight that would have raised eyebrows back east, but was simply practical out here. As dawn broke on the 11th, we set out. The rain had slackened to a fine mist, but the world remained shrouded in gray. Our party consisted of 5, the cattleman, Uncle Jim, Jed Parker, Windy Bill, and myself. The horses' hooves made sucking sounds as we rode out, the trail a ribbon of mud stretching before us into the mist-shrouded distance. Our way led first through a canyon bed filled with rounded boulders and rocks, slippery and treacherous in the wet. Big cottonwoods and oaks grew thick along the sides, their branches heavy with moisture, partially concealing the cliffs that rose on either side of us. The rim rock loomed above, mysterious with caves and hanging gardens of ferns and grasses that clung to long transverse crevices in the stone face. As we worked our way up to a divide, a range of wild and rugged mountains came into view on our right. They rose by slopes and ledges steep and rough, ending in 1,000-foot cliffs that ran unbroken for miles. These buttes were to be our constant companions for the rest of our journey, the only fixed points in the tumult of lesser peaks and twisted canyons through which we were to pass. The sky remained a patchwork of sun and shadow, each break in the clouds raising hopes of clearing weather. Yet, as we watched, a thick cloud gathered about the tops of the galluros above us. In an instant it was swept away by the wind, but when the peaks showed again, they were white with snow, as though some celestial painter had passed a brush over them in the brief moment they were obscured. Our progress, already slow, became infinitely more difficult as we pressed on. The clay subsoil turned treacherously slick, and on the mountain slopes it was all we could do to keep our footing. Our clothes were soon soaked through, our hands puffed and purple with cold, our boots squelching with each step. The horses struggled too, their flanks heaving with the effort of navigating the treacherous terrain. Uncle Jim pointed to a ridge ahead, speaking of an old shack he'd fixed up 7 years prior. The promise of shelter, however meager, spurred us on. We slipped and slid our way forward, each man focused solely on the ground before him, aware that a misstep could mean a broken leg, or worse, in this unforgiving country. The cold deepened as we climbed, and the mist thickened once more into a proper rain. The cliffs and palisades near at hand showed dimly through the curtain of water, while beyond the storm clouds writhed and eddied, revealing and concealing the mountains in a dance that lent them proportions of unearthly grandeur. In the box canyons below, we could hear the growing roar of streams rapidly filling. The soft swish of water seemed to usurp the very air, drowning out all other sounds. It was a scene of both misery and majesty, the kind that makes a man feel small and yet alive in a way that civilization never could. We reached the shack as evening was drawing in, only to find its roof had caved in. The floor was a good 6 inches deep in adobe mud. We sat on our horses, water streaming from our hats, contemplating our next move. Windy Bill said he knew of a cave on the other side of the next ridge, close under a butte. He told us it was big, but with such a steep floor that he wasn't sure how we would be able to stay in it. I at least liked the thought of looking at a dry place anyway. We all felt the same about it, so back over the ridge we went. About halfway down the other side, Uncle Jim turned sharp to the right, and as the hog-back rise dropped behind us, we found ourselves out on the steep side of a mountain, the perpendicular cliff over us to the right, the river roaring savagely far down below our left, and sheets of water glazing the footing we could find among the boulders and debris. Hardly could the ponies keep from slipping sideways on the slope. As we proceeded farther and farther from the solidity of the ridge behind us, we experienced the illusion of venturing out on a tight rope over abysses of space. Even the feeling of danger was only an illusion, however, composite of the falling rain, the deepening twilight, and the night that had already enveloped the plunge of the canyon below. Finally, Uncle Jim stopped just within the drip from the cliffs. He showed us the cave, and so we descended eagerly. A deer bounded away from the base of the buttes. The cave ran steep, in the manner of an inclined tunnel, far up into the dimness. We had to dig our toes in and scramble to make way up it at all, but we found it dry, and after a little search discovered a foot-ledge of earth sufficiently broad for a seat. Then for sleeping spots. We scattered. Windy Bill and I promptly annexed the slight overhang of the cliff whence the deer had jumped. It was dry at the moment, but we uttered pessimistic predictions if the wind should change. Uncle Jim and the cattleman had a little tent and insisted on descending to the canyon bed. They headed back down, promising to handle the cooking. That left Windy Bill, Jed Parker, and me. In a moment, Windy Bill came up to us, whispering and mysterious. He told us to get our caballos and follow him. We did so. He led us 200 yards to another cave, 20 feet high, 15 feet in diameter, level as a floor. He had found the spot while searching for dry tinder in some brambles. We unpacked our beds with chuckles of joy and spread them carefully within the shelter of the cave. Except for the very edges, which did not much matter, our blankets, protected by the canvas tarp, were reasonably dry. We finished laying out our blankets. The result looked good to us. We all burst out laughing. We talked like we were sorry for the other fellows. We hobbled our horses and descended to the gleam of the fire which could be seen at the canyon bottom. At Uncle Jim and the cattleman's camp, we kept quiet, feeling like guilty conspirators. There we ate hastily of meat, bread, and coffee, merely for the sake of sustenance. It certainly amounted to little in the way of pleasure. The water from the direct rain, the shivering trees, and our hat brims accumulated in our plates faster than we could bail it out. The dishes were thrust under a canvas. Uncle Jim and Lester decided to remain with their tent, and so we saw them no more until morning. We broke off backloads of mesquite and toiled up the hill, tasting thickly the high altitude and the severe labor. At the big cave we dumped down our burdens, transported our fuel piecemeal to the vicinity of the narrow ledge, built a good fire, sat in a row, and lit our pipes. In a few moments the blaze was burning high, and our bodies had ceased shivering. Fantastically, the firelight revealed the knobs and crevices, the ledges, and the arching walls. Their shadows leaped, following the flames, receding and advancing like playful beasts. Far above us was a single tiny opening through which the smoke was sucked as through a chimney. The glow ruddied the men's features. Outside was thick darkness, and the swish and rush and roar of rising waters. Listening, Windy Bill was reminded of a story. We leaned back comfortably against the sloping walls of the cave, thrust our feet toward the blaze, smoked, and hearkened to the tale of Windy Bill.